So this right here close to the sea looks like the best area to take a look and see what we can find. Here's a map trying to look at what this continent looks like. Plato said that what was special about this continent was that it had a huge flat plain that was very livable. So why don't we do a little magic here, and I think the best way to see this is in a 3D type of image. Let's see if we can make that happen for you. So what I've done here is I've made a 3D representation of this continent. While making this representation, I basically made it exaggerate the heights of things by about 100 times, so we can clearly see any flat plains that could be spoken of. Now here's something interesting to look at. Over to the left we have the Atlas Mountains, which look like they could have very well been quite the barrier for people in the Mediterranean Sea to pass over into this land over here. The white that you see in these pictures is the whiter, the taller. That's how this is working. The light green is the lowest elevations. These white colors here and below you don't want to take into account because they represent underwater, so they don't fit into the color scheme of elevations of the land itself. But we can certainly see that there is a incredible flat plain. Here is a view from the top. We were looking this direction. Once again, we could see quite a bit of flat land here to live on. This is a huge area. And these Atlas Mountains, we got a better view of that also. All this white here, quite a blockage from the Mediterranean. All this pinkish area here would be the Mediterranean Sea. Now, what's interesting to look at when we see all this flat land is that here's the Pillars of Hercules. Here's Spain. You look over there, you don't see much flat land at all, comparatively, not even close. But I can certainly see if this was Atlantis, the continent of Atlantis, and he gave Gadeirus this edge of the continent, I could certainly see Gadeirus not wanting to be under his brother's control, and therefore perhaps taking over the area over here eventually. Because as we know, they moved out to other places and ruled over islands in the sea and other lands as far in as Tyrrhenia, as we talked about before. And look at all this land. Mountainous Italy here. A lot of mountainous region all around. But there are definitely huge areas here that seem to fit the bill. Now, another thing I've heard about as far as locations where kings love to build their castles is that they tend to love their castles to be built in high places that are very fortified and not easy for armies to access. That's probably why the Circle City was so appealing for Atlas. To have water, then land, then water, that would make it pretty difficult for armies to attack a city like that. So why don't we just for fun go and look for the highest peaks within all this flat land and see if we can find where Atlas might have wanted to build his Circle City. So now I thought it'd be fun to make it so we could easily see the difference between where land would be and where water would be. If we're, let's say, flooding the whole area and then draining it to slowly see where the highest peaks will show up first, to see where a king might want to build their fortress, castle, and city. The blue and the white, once again, is all the land. Disregard these colors below as they represent today's ocean, so they don't really count. So here we go. Nothing on the plain yet. Something happening here. This is starting to stand out more and more. Over here could be a possibility for Atlas, and over here, but it looks like we have a little area in here that looks quite interesting. Let's continue. Ah, very interesting. We can see here that this whole section here is level and higher than all of this around here, which is quite interesting. And then it looks like the land kind of drops off now going toward what would be the sea down here. And so here's a better look at that. So we have the high land, which kind of fits Plato's description of being precipitous from the sea, because you go onto the low land, climb, 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 and you get to this high land here, of which this is the highest landmark in the entire area, and this also on this side. So you have this little kind of little dip here that goes toward the sea. Looks like water could flow possibly toward the sea this way. But what's really interesting is what we have here. Look at this. Oh my goodness. Looks like you have a hill in the middle. Water could possibly have been around that. Looks like this right here could hold in water quite well. It's pretty fascinating. Now what's interesting is that Plato said that the city, the circle city of Atlantis, had high mountains toward the north, which could easily block the north coming wind. As we noticed when we lowered the waters, this mountainous area is the highest right up along this edge. And then it goes down toward the south, because that way is the north, this way is the south. He said in his description that the mountains came down around the city and blocked the north. That fits very well. Here is that map laid out flat over Africa. Down here is the area we were looking at. It looks like from the circle, here's the circle we looked at, that there could be a river that actually does go all the way to the sea. That is interesting. There were a lot of rainwater which created all of this back in this thousands of years ago. That rainwater would fill up the lakes, fill up the mountains, and then that would drain down toward the sea. So here is what that might have looked like in the 3D. We had water coming from the mountain, from the rains, coming down into here, creating possibly a little lake in here, and some water maybe even draining into this circle area here. But according to the map, there would have been a lake on this side over here. This does tilt down slightly, and so we show a possibility of our lake being on this edge because of this slant that happens right here. So it's possible there could have been a lake here. Also, this does not come from the map. This just comes from when I was draining the water earlier. I kind of filled in possibilities of what could have occurred. Because of this tilt, we could have ended up with a lake down here. Because of this one complete circle, we could have ended up with water in here with this middle area sticking out. And I'm sure with the thousands and thousands of men Atlas had working for him, that he could have blocked off certain waterways and done tons of building to make this a much more inhabitable place. I mean, just look at the monoliths of history, the huge stuff that was built, pyramids and so forth. But it does look like we have some rivers that would end up going to the sea. But this distance here is much further than 50 stadia. So perhaps the 50 stadia could be just to a little lake here, which if the water was higher, could actually connect with this water here and eventually make it down to the sea. Perhaps that would be a possibility. So when we look at the description of Plato, this area fits it, oh my gosh, so extremely well. It's unbelievable. Yet, the text makes it sound like the continent was actually facing north to south. And this is not. This is actually facing east to west here. That's north and south here. So the city fits the description impeccably. And I just wonder if maybe when this was all being described, if there was a little mix-up between the direction that this mountain and its city faced compared to mixing it up with how the continent faced. I don't know. Something to think about. On this graphic here, we show how this could be kind of the center island. And then we don't have a complete circle on the outside, but a pretty impressive circular shape there. So you definitely would have island and water, then land, then water, then land. But then you'd have some spots where not so much, perhaps. Of course, with their technology, they could have actually, who knows, built a wall around here.
Okay, guys, let's take a quick look at the measurement of the Richat structure compared to the measurement of Plato's ringed city. So this entire outline right here, which to me would be the walled part spoken of, that's a great distance from the center island, that ringed part there, which would be that outer wall if this was Atlantis, well, measurement-wise, according to Plato, that ring wall is this outside yellow portion here. And then there would be his 50 stadia canal to what he called to the sea. So let's just state right up front that these measurements are not matching for the Richat structure. As we said, this ring here would be the wall that holds in all the water and land structures of Plato's Atlantis. And then you have the 50 stadia canal. So we can see that Plato's size descriptions do not match the Richat structure. The Richat structure is much bigger. And then these ring structures here would actually be quite a bit bigger than as Plato described. So now that we got that out of the way, we can go ahead and speculate with what really could have been this Atlantis city that perhaps was not so perfectly formed as Plato described, but indeed incredibly formed, as I've never seen a structure like this in the world, especially at this size. So now that we got that out of the way, let's look at some actual measurements of the Richat structure. Now we've created this based on, of course, just the elevations of the land on where water was likely to have filled up in the structure. From the tip of this giant lake here over to these lakes here, we have about 100 stadia in length. The diameter of this complete circle here is about 75 stadia in length. The average measurement from edge to edge of the largest circular portion is about 226 stadia. This blue line here, I simply drew in this example to show a possibility of a canal created to get over to these lakes here. We'll talk more about that though. Now also up to this point, we've been using exaggerated heights to see structures as well as we possibly can, and it's helped us find some real fascinating features of the land. But the problem with exaggerated structures is we sometimes get fooled into thinking things that aren't true. For example, when we look at the back of the Richat structure's land mass, we could be fooled into thinking that these are steep, impenetrable cliffs. So now what we want to do is get more realistic on how things would look without all the exaggerated height, and give us a more realistic view of this area. And also I'll be showing you some more fascinating and potentially accurate layout of how the water could have flowed. So let's start off by looking, say, from this little landmass here toward the back of the Richat structure where it looks like these high cliffs are. We'll start off, say, standing here, looking this general direction. Here we are miles away over here, looking toward the back of the Richat structure. We can see it's really more of a normal mountain, which probably could be traversed just like any other mountain. Probably has little winding paths that help you get up the mountain by horseback or what have you. Here's another view from the back with a more realistic view of the ringed landmasses off in the distance. And you can even see way off in the distance how far away the opposite land actually would look from this, let's say, helicopter view. Now let's come around and see from the opposite side. Here's the back of the Richat structure off in the distance. Atlas's castle and home here in the middle island area. Obviously far less ominous than some of our previous exaggerated models, but more realistic. And here is yet another view of that, looking pretty sharp. And now for some of my absolute favorite images. where you can see, because of the added colors into the color scale, much more information about where the water can flow according to its depths. We can see more clearly how this river coming off this mountain could have fed into the giant circle lake, and how water could have filled over into these portions of the lake. We see this 100 stadia distance we measured before, and how possibly the water could reach to here from this side, maybe up to here or here from this side. In previous images, I've shown you that this structure here, this mountainous structure here, is actually blocking any of the waters here from getting into this portion of the lake. The reason why that's important is because this portion of the lake, as I've showed in previous images, is the portion that feeds off into the rivers which eventually lead to the ocean. So if Atlas did make a canal, as described 50 stadia to the sea, then it's quite likely this would be the canal connector that needed to be made. Somehow, possibly following along this area here, and somewhere along the way, creating a tunnel or something that gets through this landmass here. And that canal would be needed for this structure to connect and eventually run to the ocean. Now let's look at that from another angle. So here we are again with this beautiful image. Atlas's home and castle in the middle. Just look at all the beautiful beaches on the extremity. No wonder why Plato talked about how so many boats would have been out in this outer area, partying till all times of the night, making such loud noises that could not hardly be believed. Here we see the best image of where waters could have flowed from the back highest parts of the Ricot structure land into the waters. You can see that you would have had pools of water here and here flowing straight down into this long curved river that extends all the way around and eventually drops down into this portion of the lake here and this portion of the lake here. Perhaps we can also see a possibility of how water may have come down here, created this little valley here, and dropped into the water. So perhaps this water was able to flow all the way around and into the structure from two very distant points. And of course, this points toward the actual tilting of the Ricot structure, as the Ricot structure is high on this side, going down and getting lower toward this direction, as we've shown before. And we have this beautiful illustration of how the water flowed once again. Just gorgeous. Now here's the other angle from what we looked at a minute ago. Once again, from here over to here, about 100 stadia in length. And here we see this beautiful and obvious example of how water flowed from the mountain up here, little pool here possibly, down into this lake, which, as we said before, follows rivers into the ocean. And we mentioned the canal built by Atlas perhaps would have followed on the other side of this high ridge here. This canal is absolutely necessary, and perhaps a tunnel through this mountainous area in order to reach the waters which do reach the seas. And here we get a better look of how this ridge extends all the way down and how the waters begin their journey all the way toward the sea. This image shows us so much that we could not see in other images.
Here's just one more view of this. So this is with the map overlay. Now this red square here I added, that's the 345 miles by 230 miles, which is 3,000 stadia by 2,000 stadia. When we look at this image here, we can see that it does fit in there quite nicely. Looks like perhaps there's more plane even that could be used up, but that's not a bad fit.